Okay, hello everybody and welcome to this new episode of the Indie Diarist podcast. This is Anthony L. Wolf, your loyal Indie Diarist speaking. Content manager by day, gamer by night. I've always introduced myself differently and on these intros anyway, but I'll stick to something at some point. So today with me is another very special guest, Enrique. And how do you say your last name, sir? Oh, that's the easiest thing I could think of. Okay, right. Well, Enrique, tell me a little bit about yourself and maybe a little bit about your studio, but don't worry about that because I have a question specifically for that later on. So, yeah, over to you.
Well, it's always hard to say something short about yourself. I've been an indie developer. I think that's the most relevant thing for about nearly 12 years. I started while I was still in college, made 3 games on Steam and 1 game that's just a free-to-play tabletop RPG. So let's keep it at that for now.
Yeah, wow, that's the shortest I've had on these episodes so far. Amazing. Okay, so yeah, well, I got in touch with you, Enrique, because you have just released a new game, isn't that right?
Yeah. That's correct. Our most recent game, Aces and Adventures, just launched a week and 1 day ago.
Yeah, and I've had a chance to play it because you kindly offered a key for that. It's interesting, but we'll talk about Aces and Adventures later. The only thing I can tell you is that I love the concept. And this is just to build a bit of anticipation in the listeners. But yeah, I love the concept of merging tabletop RPGs with card games. So we'll talk a bit more about that. But before that, let's do a little icebreaker. What's one game you would recommend anyone to play? And I think this tells a lot about the guests that come on these episodes. So over to you.
Well, you know what? I'm partial to a game that I think that some people may not have heard of. People have heard of Heroes of Might and Magic. That's sort of a more strategy game. You move around in a world map and then you fight on hex grids. But I actually like Might and Magic 7 and 8. So those are the seemingly where people are least familiar with the Might and Magic franchise. But I highly recommend it if anybody wants to see kind of a game that got sort of swept under the rug thanks to games like EverQuest. Because it was releasing around the same time, and yet it offers you a really expansive world with tons of options and everything that a lot of people miss. So I always recommend that for any RPG fan out there that wants to try an old school game. Might and Magic 7 and 8 are probably pretty good. There's a few other ones in there, but I think those are my favorites.
Yeah, right. Then something to check out for myself too, because I am a big fan of RPGs and fantasy. So it's going to be a nice one to check out. So, well, it's interesting that you mentioned old school games. Which games do you remember playing growing up? What are like your favorites, the ones that you remember most fondly?
Well, I don't know if the camera quality will be enough to see back there, but I've got a bunch of games. I've got things like from EverQuest. I've got a lot of Nintendo stuff back there. I am a big Diablo fan, World of Warcraft. I was a guide on EverQuest, so that's like a GM, a person who helps, do customer service, but just doesn't get paid. And then I was also one of the first, I'm going to say 300 to 500 people to play World of Warcraft.
Wow.
Very closed beta because I had done that for EverQuest, so I was invited to do that. So this was before there were any skill trees, anything like that. And of course, what everyone was saying at the time was like, you guys got to bring in the Diablo-like skill tree into World of Warcraft. And I made the foolish decision of playing EverQuest 2 before I played World of Warcraft because when I played it, it was kind of boring. But EverQuest 2 didn't turn out to be that great. And then, of course, I had a very long love affair with World of Warcraft. So I've been predominantly an RPG player, but I play all kinds of games. I'm very genre ambivalent or whatever you might want to say. I like all kinds of games, from Smash Bros. To real-time strategy games to first-person shooters. I played Return to Castle Wolfenstein probably for thousands upon thousands of hours trying to climb the splatter ladder. So all over the place.
Yeah, well, you're a polyedric gamer, I suppose. Yeah, that's I can say the exact same thing about me. I enjoy every single genre out there. Card games are an interesting one because I like them when I play them, but I don't go actively seeking them. That's an interesting one. But now let's move into the game dev questions. So when did you realize you wanted to be a game developer? So what was your aha moment? I think everybody has one.
Well, yeah, this is a somewhat of a good story here. Is I first went to get a degree in psychology, and I wanted to become a psychologist. But I look kind of the part now. I'm 41. Okay, when I was 23,
wow, you wouldn't say, and the listeners won't be able to say because this doesn't go on video. But yeah, no, Enrique does look very young.
Yeah, so when I was 23, I looked like 12, like nothing. So there was no chance that somebody was going to come in and start telling me their problems and that I was going to be like, oh yeah, I understand. I didn't understand, by the way, because I had no life experience. So I was like very disillusioned with my capacity to do that. And so for a year, I just worked at Best Buy. I worked as a waiter. This was with a college degree from a good university and everything. And then I thought, what can I do? Well, let's see. I've wasted my entire, well, not wasted, but thankfully now, but at the time it felt like I'd wasted my entire life playing video games. And I thought, how can I turn that into some kind of an attribute, And so now I have that as an asset, that I have this experience. And I went back to school, learned how to do this with my brother, of course, who's entering school. We're 4 years apart, 4.5 years apart. So it worked out very well because I got to go do a second degree when then we both came out making video games. So that was the origin story of how I decided to become a video game developer. I kind of had no choice because that had been where I'd focused all my time.
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, I think that feeling of playing a lot of games in your early years and feeling like you've been wasting your time, I think it's pretty common because then at some point you just want to do something with that passion. And to be quite honest with you, it's something felt weird when you mentioned EverQuest and the early days of World of Warcraft, because it was like, there's no way he's so young. Did he really live through that? No, apparently not. So yeah, I was just trying to do some weird maths in my head, and now I understand why it didn't add up. But yeah, so I mean, in my personal case, it was just I'm a writer by day, as I mentioned. And I've always wanted to get into writing games. At some point I will. I've done some freelance stuff here and there. But there's always that feeling of, this is a great hobby of mine. It's something I really enjoy. Maybe I could make money with it. I could find a way to monetize it. And the moment you understand there's a way to do that, it's always pretty magical. So, yeah. So again, coming back into game development, so you mentioned that you developed a few games like free to play and something like that. What's the very first game you ever developed, not published? So what's the very first thing you ever did?
Well, that's kind of a difficult question because I have always been making games. Even as a kid, I would make silly games for my friends to play. I think one of the funniest ones was we would have note cards. And so imagine that you're playing Warhammer or something like that. We called it Military Madness, but it was just note cards with like stats for like a little tank or an airplane or whatever. And we'd play across the entirety of the house. And we would use, I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but whenever you bought Super Nintendo cartridges, they'd have a little sleeve that was just a little piece of plastic.
I know about that. Yeah, okay. I lived through the PS1 era, so I just saw the tail end of that kind of period.
So get this. Well, that was our unit of measurement. So like when we would say you have 3 range, it was 3 Super Nintendo plastic sleeves that you would flip like that, one head over head. And the thing is, the reason we did that is because we had a lot of those and we didn't have rulers. So, I started there. But the actual first game that I developed that was worth anything was probably actually the first game that we released, which was Ring Runner. And that was worked on while we were in college.
Okay, so I suppose that's also, well, it may not be. Is that the game / project you're most proud of, or is there something else?
I would say it depends on like where I'm deriving my pride, right? So Ring Runner was very like much more personal because we had no idea what we were doing commercially. We just made what we wanted to make. And it was based on a game called Silent Death that we had played on AOL Games, where it was like 99 cents a minute. And we played on my friend's account, and it was like thousands of dollars by the end of it. And so then we were never able to play that game again. And I really enjoyed it. So we kind of made something like it. So it was very personal. And I wrote a novel that went with it. And I also did the soundtrack. So that was, it was a good first step because I got the experience of doing all the stuff. Wasn't extremely commercially successful, but it was okay. Then we did Pop-Up Dungeon, and Pop-Up Dungeon is probably maybe the highest merit game that we've made because it's just a whole gaming system that we created. It took 7 years to make, so it was very hard to do. But this game, Aces and Adventures, has been so far the best received, the best commercial success. We made it with an idea of like what the industry and what people want. So we've learned a little bit.
I guess that was a step forward in that sense. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, Aces Adventure is an interesting one. We're getting there actually because, well, first of all, tell me a bit about your studio and team and how it came together, and also why the Triple B, because you're called Triple B Studios. Sure. But looking at your initials, and you're 3 people, but you can your initials, there's no correlation. So I was like, why is that?
Well, Triple B, that's an easy answer. And Triple B is just from AAA. So it's like, we don't make AAA games,
right.
we make Triple B games, right? Because we can't make AAA games. But the idea why Triple B, it's because we want to make games that have as much replayability and give you as much like that sort of like meaty fun that I always really enjoyed from old Blizzard games in particular, but a lot of other studios, where it feels like you just got so much to devour in that game. It doesn't feel like an experience, which I'm not saying that I don't like games that are just experiences. I love a lot of them, but those are the type of games that we were striving to make, which are hard to make for indie developers, but that was kind of the goal. So that's why Triple B. And the studio started off as just me and my brother making Ring Runner. And then we quickly realized like neither of us could really do any artwork. Like I could do modeling, animation, particles, sound, writing, all that, but I couldn't really draw very well. Neither could he. I mean, he could probably do better than me. And so I went out to the place you normally do when you need an artist, which is Match.com. And then I found an artistic girl, and I married her, and we've been happy ever since, I guess.
Oh, great. Yeah, well, that worked out well then. Okay. Yeah. That's amazing, right? Well, so that's how Triple B came to be, I suppose. Yeah. Amazing. And yeah, so, well, you mentioned you do a lot of stuff. I mean, you introduced yourself to me by somewhat of a sound designer or something like that. But also now you say that you do a little bit of art, modeling, and animation. You also write. What is your biggest source of inspiration? Is it other games? Is it art? Is it something else entirely?
I try not to derive my inspiration from any one source. I actually have I always have multiple things going at once, and I get inspired in packets. One of the things that I think hampers a lot of creatives is if they try to derive their inspiration from one source and then they try to push that passion forward, either you're making a short project or you're going to run out of passion. So you have to be able to get your inspiration from different sources all the time. And sometimes it has to be indirect. So maybe I just see something, like I could watch a TV show and I see that, oh, wow, that was really well written or something. And instead of saying, well, that was really well written, I'm not going to be able to write something as well, I'm going to just stop. Instead, I will go ahead and say, that's challenging me to write better. So I get inspired to go and try to write a better line, to make a better thing, whatever it is that I'm working on. And so you just get inspiration almost from like the challenge of other artwork. That's one of the ways I do it anyway. And it lets you do like a 7-year-long project,
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. So great that it's probably going to be in one of the audiograms of this episode. So that's why you were seeing me typing away. Okay. Taking the time. Okay, well, yeah, about inspiration then. What inspired you to work on Aces and Adventures? And actually now for the listeners, we can finally say Aces and Adventure is...
Okay, so Aces and Adventures is a deck builder, kind of RPG. It has two modes you can play. You can play through a narrated story, and you can also play the procedural, the sort of randomized map in a more Slay the Spire kind of way. So its main angle is that it combines poker with a traditional deck builder. You can use your poker hand as mana, or you can throw poker powered attacks, which is like a pair, triple, or any 5-card hand that's valid in poker. And, people would probably think, oh, well, you probably got inspiration from things like, and I have a whole attic full of Magic the Gathering cards. So yes, of course, I do get inspiration from that. But things like Hearthstone or Slay the Spire, and while I like those games, I wouldn't say that that's the reason we developed it. There was a moment in the cycle of Pop-Up Dungeon where things were very slow on my end because I was just creating assets and preparing all these things, but we had to prepare a whole sort of engine behind it in order to make it work. So for a while, my sort of creative juices were flowing, and I just decided, hey, let's try to make this little card game. So we made what was called Dungeons and Deuces. That was something that we released for free. It's just a fun little cooperative card game that you can play.
And I saw it on your website, and I saw that it looked very similar to Aces and Adventures.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder what's the connection there.
That's definitely the evolution right there, right? So we had this idea of seeing if we could do something that was in between a party game and Dungeons and Dragons, and we kind of did that. But then we said, hey, I think what we should do is create two games. One of them is a party game, and that's what this one is. But it's not really a party game. It's just a single-player, fast-paced fun, because playing the cards in that way was just very engaging. So we decided to make that digital, and that's Aces and Adventures. And now we're kind of working on, behind the scenes, A3, which is Advanced Aces and Adventures, which is going to be a Dungeons and Dragons style version of Aces and Adventures, which is going to use playing cards like that, and as much as we can keep to the same formula, but make it make sense for tabletop RPG.
It's great, and what I find fascinating about this game is that you are blending actually Dungeons and Dragons and poker. So it's clear your influences are clear, like card games, of course, as you mentioned, Magic the Gathering, but also all those RPG or tabletop role-playing games that you've done, even just that moment in your house with your friends, just playing just a made up RPG around the house with sleeves from SNES games.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's also incredibly fascinating, and something a bit more fun now. What's the most annoying bug you fixed on Aces and Adventures?
Oh, well, that would be much better to ask my brother, because we divide the work where he is. I do actually a lot of the bug fixes on abilities, like when the ability is incorrect, right? Or something in the actual scripting within the game is incorrect. But he does all of the balancing and he does all of the work on the programming end of things. So if there's a real bug, he's usually the one that has to fix it. If it's just like, hey, this ability didn't work right, then I would have to fix it. So I don't really have that many annoying bugs to fix, and he's got a lot of them.
Wow, yeah.
So I don't know.
Sending a lot of love to your brother then, yeah.
Yeah, he's
probably going to have a lot of interesting stories there.
He definitely fixes the bugs.
Yeah, well, you're clearly a very closely tight-knit group there at Triple B Studios. Personally, for you, why are you a game developer? What is it drives you forward?
It's kind of the only skill set that I have that stands out. Since I have to do so many different things, it's just very hard for me to say, oh, I'm like, how I said that I do some sound design. It's like, yeah, but there's a lot of sound designers that can do better sound work than I can. There's people that are going to be able to do all of the aspects of my job better than I can because they devote themselves to it. So the only thing that I might be able to stand out at is the ability to kind of put it all together in a game. So that's why I'm passionate about doing this.
Yeah, it's a great answer, and funny enough, you're not the first person who says it's the only skill that I have, because I guess it's a strong enough motivation. Yeah, to me, I also feel like writing is the only thing that I can do well, and that's, I guess, what drives me forward, makes me feel better. I guess we're nearing the end now. Do you ever And this may hit. Do you ever feel lonely or discouraged as an indie dev, and how do you cope with that?
I'm very fortunate, as you know, to not just work with, but I live with my family. So the opposite of loneliness. Maybe sometimes, I'd like time to myself, perhaps, as most people do. So thankfully, I don't have to suffer for that. But I do feel the sense of isolation from the greater group, right? So like we have this nice sort of unit that works very well and everything, but you're just like an island out, like nobody knows you exist. Nobody cares. No, we have some little, some fans and some following. But other than that, it would be fantastic if there could be better community for developers and things like that. But it's just so hard to do because they're scattered throughout the world. They all are working on different projects. We're all very busy. So there's no practical way to do it. So that's just something that's going to come with, and a writer as well, I think is going to be something, a musician perhaps, that you just feel isolated because your craft is also something that you have to internalize. So especially if you're writing, if you're like a lot of people go to a cabin to be alone on purpose to write. So just something you got to deal with.
Yeah, I can definitely see what you mean. I mean, even just creative arts can be isolating, not lonely, but definitely isolating. And when it comes to even just for myself, writing a social media post, for example, I tend to be maybe focused in my own bubble. And so that can make me feel like isolated from the rest of the world. But it's great that on Twitter, for example, I don't know if you've seen it or if you actively participate in those, but it's great to have things like Trailer Tuesdays, Wishlist Wednesdays, I love that. But of course, everybody is so busy pushing their own thing. And it feels like there's maybe a need for a more cohesive indie game development community that can support all of these people and all their incredible efforts. Like, I joined a few over time, of course. I don't know if you know Brackeys, the guys who used to...
That's the sort of Unity tutorial type guy, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I've actually seen some of those.
Yeah, me too. I think everybody's seen them at some point. But yeah, I think it's those guys gather the kind of indie dev community. At least they want to be indie devs, but it feels like there's a need for a more wider community now. So yeah, we'll see maybe over time.
Just to say one last thing about the previous topic to anybody who is in that space, who's maybe feeling lonely. I think it's important to note as a creative, at least this is the way I feel about it, like your sacrifice comes through in your art. So when I hear a musician, when I read a writer who is bleeding on the page, it has greater value to me. So your suffering can also, be adding an additional flair to your actual production of artwork. And so don't say that. I'm not saying go and make yourself miserable so you produce better art, but know that it has value. Okay, so
yeah, well, a lot of Italian writers from Italian literature would probably disagree with you on that. But yeah, anyway, moving on. Something I'm really curious about: if you had unlimited budget and time, what game would you create?
What game would I make? And
I know it's a tricky question because it's.
I would have. Yeah, it is. I would have to say, even though it's foolish to try, I would try to make an MMO because it's kind of like the highest bar that you can set as a game designer, in my opinion. And I love MMOs, so I would probably try to design an MMO, but that would only be with the unlimited time and budget because I know it's way beyond the scope of our current abilities, time, resources, etc.
Yeah, well, I see what you mean. I'm listening to Jason Schreier's last book. I don't know if you've read that.
I know who he is.
Oh, yeah, there you go. It's Press Reset, and it's about layoffs in the gaming industry and all of that. But anyway, in that book, there's a section about World of Warcraft, what kind of watershed moment it was. It was gathering communities and all of that together and showing you that you can be exactly any kind of person that you want to be, any kind of hero that you want to be. And I think it was such an important moment in gaming, and that's why it was so successful. At the time, a lot of people just wanted to do MMOs. And can you blame them for it? I mean, World of Warcraft brought in millions of dollars every month, as far as I can remember. So yeah, I can definitely relate with that. Well, I guess we're near the end now, so just as a wrap-up, some parting words. Where can other people find you? And if they do, how can they best support you? I suppose by buying your game, of course.
Well, definitely just buying our games on Steam. So the 3 that are on there is Aces and Adventures, Pop-Up Dungeon, and Ring Runner Flight of the Sages. They're very different games, so just pick the one you like. Aces and Adventures is, of course, the most recent one, the one that I recommend to check out first, especially if you're into card games. But if you want to just follow me, I don't really do much social media, again, because I don't really have time. But I do occasionally, when there is time in my development space, I make videos on YouTube. So that's just the Triple B Titles channel on YouTube. You can follow us there. I actually talk about MMOs and things like that when I'm given the opportunity.
All right, yeah, well, and of course all of these things will be in the description of the episode, so just head over there and make sure to follow and support Enrique and his team, Triple B Studios, in any way you can. So, again, thank you so much for your time, Enrique. It was lovely to have you here on the podcast, and yeah, let's keep in touch. Let's see what we can do in the future.
Thank you.
And here we go. That's a wrap on another episode of the Indie Diaries podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you did enjoy the show and this episode in particular, please subscribe. You can also find the show on other platforms. I mean, we are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, anywhere you can think of. And if you do want to support the show further, please follow me on Twitter. You can find me at The Indie Diarist on Twitter, and that's the only platform where the podcast is right now. There will be more ways to support the show in the future, but for now, that's it. So, also, please give Enrique a follow and Triple B Studios and try out their game, Aces and Adventure. It's, well, Ace. Oh my god, yeah, dad jokes, I'm too young for that. Well, see you next time.